Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. You know who it is. We got kind of a big video right here in front of you. It is time to acknowledge that we are halfway through the 2020 decade. So I thought, as a result of that, I would take the time to acknowledge what I feel are the best albums so far over the past 5 years. Because, yeah, making it halfway through the 2020s, it's an accomplishment, especially considering the state of the 2020s so far. So why not go back and look at the best musical offerings the decade has had to give us. Now keep in mind all of these albums are listed in no particular order, but rest assured, like, in my opinion, these are the 50 best albums of the past 5 years. And look, over the past 5 years, there's been a lot of great music. So this list wasn't necessarily the easiest to make, but these are the albums that I, in fact, feel very passionate about. Let's start with the 2021 album from Tyler, the Creator, Call Me If You Get Lost, which may not be my favorite Tyler, the Creator album. I mean, that would be Igor, but it's still a fantastic album. Really his return to straight up rap, and he engages in the art form with loads and loads and loads of flexes and super colorful production too. Some of his most badass tracks to date, and I think genre-bending tracks to date, land on this record, and in a way it feels like he's really bringing back that old school Tyler energy on this project, but doing it in a way where it's just more refined and more artful and just more deeply informed by his experiences up until this point. Again, it's an excellent album that I think will go down as one of the most impressive in Tyler's growing discography, which as he continues to release more music, he just keeps dropping good stuff. So for this album to continue to stand tall and be remembered among all of these other very good LPs, I think is saying something. At least that's what it's doing for me. My next pick for this list is going to be the Mac Miller album Circles, his first big posthumous album, which, as you guys remember, was originally intended to be connected to his swimming record. And not only does it beautifully contrast with that album, but it sees Mac fully going into singer-songwriter mode with some absolutely wonderful ballads. Ones that not only showcase much better singing than what he has brought to the table in the past on some projects, but also lush, wonderful, and tastefully retooled production for this project that complements the song so well. It speaks to Mac's talents and abilities that he could shift so fluidly into a totally different type of songcraft and have it come out so well, so beautiful, and attach it to lyricism that hits with maximum emotional impact. Next on the list, I want to give a shout out to Chat Pile's God's Country, a hard-hitting and horrifying album that truly reflects the current day dystopia that we're living in, with noisy, crushing Melvins-inspired riffs and blood-curdling shrieks and lead vocals that really illustrate just some nightmarish stuff. Be it a story about a psychotic break, or really just digging into some of the most terrible things about modern society that at this point are frankly normalized. Also, genre-wise, this album does such a great job of kind of blurring the lines between noise rock and sludge and post-hardcore too. It covers so many bases, pulls from so many clear points of inspiration, and still manages to come through with a standout and memorable sound, which is why it has made my list. Also in my top 50 of the decade so far is going to be Beyoncé's Renaissance. Kind of a no-brainer with this one, honestly, and I'm not sure if I need to necessarily re-illustrate what it is that makes this album so great. But in a nutshell, with amazing vocal performances, with versatile and colorful and frankly mind-bending production, Beyoncé takes us on a celebratory dance music odyssey, tributing multiple eras and shades within this diverse and expansive style of music. And she does it all so well. The layers, the details of this album are really too much to cover in a single shout out or blurb in a list such as this, but it's such a massive and popular album. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and presume many of you have heard this record, and if you haven't, what are you waiting for? Next on the list, I want to give a shout out to Armand with We by Diabetic Test Strips, the East Coast rap duo consisting of Billy Woods and Elucid, came through and smashed it on their most abstract, experimental, and out there album to date. When it comes to the fringes and the outskirts of hip-hop, aesthetically, musically, lyrically, this album just really goes out into just the furthest, most outer limits of the genre, with instrumentals that range from ambient to visceral, with lyricism that is profoundly grimy and smart and esoteric. Woods and Elucid continue to make a one-of-a-kind tag team on this album, and I feel like they're going to go down as one of the best duos of the past 20 years in rap music. And if that does, in fact, happen, it's going to be because of records like this. Vampire Weekend, Only God Was Above Us is going to be my next pick on this list. And what else can I say about this album other than the boys truly came back on this one? After the very underwhelming Father of the Bride record several years ago as of the shooting of this video, I had a hard time envisioning how exactly Vampire Weekend would go forward from there creatively. And I guess the obvious answer was really to go back to basics in terms of embracing production that was mixed fidelity, embraced a very wide range of different genres, also go back to all of that wordplay and nostalgic sentimental storytelling that Ezra also specializes in his songwriting. And what you end up getting here as a result is Vampire Weekend's most impressive crop of songs to date, accompanied by instrumentation that is every bit as good as the most fun and classic moments in their catalog so far, be it from their debut album or Contra or Vampires. But yeah, indie pop is back, y'all. Indie pop is back. Okay, this one right here, I feel like was kind of a given. In fact, there are a few givens on this list, but maybe this is the biggest for many, and that would be Charli XCX's BRAT. In 2024, whether it be by force or by choice, many of us had what you could call a BRAT summer. I'm not going to get into what it is to be BRAT or whether or not I qualify, but what I will say is that I listened to a whole lot of this album in 2024, and that's because I feel like it is maybe the most well-crafted, exciting, visceral, emotionally charged, and creative pop offering of the decade so far. I feel like Charli and some of her most trusted producers really came in and perfected a lot of the very hyper Y2K era dance pop aesthetics they have been working with and tweaking for years now at this point. And on top of that, we just get killer songwriting, one killer tune after the next on this record, great vocal performances, anthemic choruses, endlessly replayable pop bliss that is simultaneously very accessible but also gruff, punchy, hard-hitting, frankly kind of badass, making this, yeah, the most badass pop album of the 2020s up until this point. Next, I would like to shout out Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure, which was a totally unforeseen favorite of mine in 2020. Up until that point, I thought Jessie's music and her features were generally fine, not necessarily blowing me away, but certainly she proved herself to be a competent vocalist. She's had some undeniable features and hits, that's for sure, and I've interviewed Jessie myself after this album came out, and she herself had said that before this record came out and popped off in the way that it did, she was actually considering exiting from the music industry entirely. But then she drops this record out of the blue, which sees her totally switching it up into a bunch of vintage, niche, disco era dance music styles. And it's amazing. It's incredible. In 2020, it was my album of the year. And not only is the production dynamic and detailed, mind-blowing at some points, a lot of the time it's just a very tasteful throwback, and it's all connected to really some of the most beautiful anthems of Jessie's career. And on top of that, the album is just so goddamn sexy. This thing is steamier than a sauna in the middle of a lava pit. And if you're a dance music fan, if you're a pop music fan, it absolutely cannot be missed. Let's also hit my 2022 album of the year. That would be Natalia Lafourcade's De Todas las Flores, which is just a gorgeous, beautiful, moving, lush, detailed, just mind-blowing Latin jazz album that covers so many different stylistic bases. Of course, like usual, Natalia is using her platform to, of course, tribute the music and sounds of Mexico broadly, but the decidedly jazzier instrumentation that she engages with this time around just makes this album a really special piece. It's just endlessly beautiful, and to call it really one of the most awe-inspiring musical works of the past 5 years is it's almost an understatement. It's not complimentary enough. Also, a 2022 record on this list is going to be Soul Glow's Diaspora Problems. This Philly punk band comes through with one of the fastest and most intense and genre-diverse punk records of the past half-decade. The different musical references and intense performances, as well as just really smart to-date social commentary on this record, make it a special, one-of-a-kind experience. It's an album with deeper meanings that will really get you thinking, and blistering performances that will just leave you feeling like you fell off a building or got hit with a brick or just went down the biggest roller coaster drop ever. But yeah, incredible record. Can't say enough nice things about it. The deeply moving 2023 record Javelin from Sufjan Stevens, of course, is also very much worthy of a spot on this list. Not only does this record see Sufjan really returning to straight up chamber indie folk singing, songwriting formats, the types of sounds that he is typically known for in a big way and sounding amazing doing it. But this is also a record very much about mourning and loss and love and heartache, as it's in tribute to his late partner, and the expressions of love and fear and loneliness that are shared on this album are devastating, but also, I would say, emotionally enlightening too, which makes it more than worthy of a spot on this list. Also from 2023, I am going to work in the Jeff Rosenstock album HELLMODE, my album of the year for that year, and singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, punk scene veteran Jeff Rosenstock comes through with a record that is really a product of its dystopian times and brings together elements of pop punk and singer-songwriter music in a bunch of rowdy and cathartic songs, which showcase super high levels of emotional intelligence, as Jeff smashes it not only on the front of just being a great underground music figure for as long as he has been, but also just really doing a great job on the production of this record, on the songwriting of this record. It's just a solid work all around. Following this, next on the list, the 2024 solo Jack White album, which had no name, no title, and I don't know if there's much to say about this album other than it just kicks utter ass. Just Jack giving us rock and roll of the highest order with wild vocals, killer riffs, some amazing drum and bass work too. It's easily the most visceral and exciting thing he has ever put out solo, really going back to a lot of those raw White Stripes vibes on here, but kind of beefed up, muscled up a little bit, really incorporating all of those years of talent and experience, all compiling into one explosive killer record. Also, shout out to the 2024 album You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To from Am Knocked Loose. Yes, this album is also an incredible listen in my opinion. One of the best metalcore and hardcore albums of the past 5 years, not only because of its very thoughtful criticisms and passionate reassessments of spirituality and Christianity broadly, but on top of that, this thing has the most crushing production of any loud rock album of the past 5 years. Like right now, the loudness and volume arms race that is currently being fought in metal right now, the front is right here. This is where the battle is happening. This album sonically is just a juggernaut. It is so goddamn hefty. And also just like, you know, well assembled in terms of the crispness and clarity of each piece of instrumentation too. But yeah, really a record that can be appreciated on multiple levels for just how visceral and exciting and cathartic it is, but also its deeper lyrical concepts too. The band's approach to breakdowns generally on this record too isn't too meat and potatoes either. It's got some musical flavor to it for sure. Next on the list, let's draw some attention to the 2021 album Injury Reserve By the Time I Get to Phoenix. This is the Arizona hip-hop outfit's last kind of proper album before things really started to transition in a different direction with the untimely passing of a key member of the group, Groggs. And this album, as a result of that, is a lot of things. It is a tribute to him of sorts, featuring numerous tracks that have his vocals incorporated at some point in some way. But beyond that, musically and sonically, this is like the wildest, most out there, most boundary-pushing hip-hop album of 2021 handily. I mean, we have 5 more years to see whether or not it actually ends up being like the most experimental and challenging hip-hop record of the 2020s. Because, yeah, prior to this, there are not really any hip-hop albums that sound like this record, and I highly doubt many are going to sound like it past this point too. I truly think this album will go down as just a once-in-a-lifetime type of record, and it's also just an emotionally impactful, I would say, engagement with the end, with death, with being forced to be in a place where you have to move on. But yeah, just an amazing record overall. Also from 2021 on this list is going to be the Arca album, Kick 3. Vocalist, songwriter, producer, visionary, multi-talent, electronic music pioneer Arca. This album arrived during a time of great prolific output for Arca. It was this record series called Kick. There ended up being 5 albums in this series. Each of them had like their own direction and sound and style. And Kick 3 here is absolutely the wildest and most mind-blowing and most difficult to put into words of all of the projects. The electronic works and compositions Arca puts together on this record are so jittery, glitchy, intense, mystifying, detailed in a way that frankly is just overwhelming and thrilling. Like, it's really the sonic equivalent of information overload, and yet it's like actually, at least to me, quite enjoyable to listen to. But yeah, much of Arca's music up until this point has been sold under the guise of being quite out there and daring and experimental on some level, and this is the record where I feel like she really kind of like peaked in that sense and achieved something that honestly was further beyond the conception of really everyone except her. Like, this is an album I hear and I'm just like, holy crap, your mind. I have similar feelings about the 2020 clipping album Visions of Bodies Being Burned, a record from the pioneering experimental noise rap trio that was originally meant to be a part of like a double album experience, but apparently the 2 records that are connected here ended up being split apart over the course of the pandemic and made into separate album releases. And Both of these albums deal in themes around horror and horror films. Just a whole lot of demonic, nightmarish, scary stuff going on with the tracks from this LP between David Diggs' incredible lyrics and fast, precise, and intense rap style, and also the creative, one-of-a-kind, evocative production that only clipping can bring to the table in terms of its really esoteric sample style and sound incorporations. When it comes to a concept, few rap artists and outfits out there follow through in the way and on the level that clipping typically does, which is why this album had to land on a list such as this for me. We have a 2022 album next on this list from my boys, my Viagra boys, Cave World. The Swedish post-punk outfit came through with their third full-length album this time around, and it is a thrilling, rockin', funny, dystopian address to the horrendous world that we live in currently, and sort of analyzes general ills, societally speaking, conspiracies, QAnon stuff, other shit too. And they go at it from a place of, like, you know, evolution and looking at humans as apes and monkeys and just, like, you know, dumb animals who just think they're smarter than they actually are. And they actually dig a lot of smart commentary out of that exact angle, and also give us some of the rowdiest and most interesting and most thrilling post-punk bangers and anthems of their career so far. But yeah, as far as the 2020s are concerned, few albums are as scuzzy or as fun from a punk perspective as this one. This next 2023 release, frankly, when it came out, I did not anticipate that I would enjoy it as much as I did and still do to this day. That would be the Lana Del Rey album, Did You Know That There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard? And I don't know if in this video there's really a point or a need to necessarily explain Lana's appeal or what exactly has made her so successful of an artist up until this point. To any general music fan or pop fan, whether you mess with Lana's music or not, her appeal, her angle should be apparent. But I will say personally, more often than not, I've not really been a fan of her stuff. I think in recent years she has gotten better and more consistent, and I feel like this record over here is her essentially being peak Lana. This is peak Lana. Creatively speaking, this album is truly Lana Del Rey at her most Lana-esque, but also really just, like, you know, outdoing herself lyrically, musically, giving us songwriting that is actually thoughtful, personal, mature, while on the back end of the record too, dabbling in some tracks and musical ideas that really kind of throw it back to the raunchier and weirder days of her career, where the substance of her music was just maybe a bit more polarizing. It's almost like a bit of a victory lap and a way of showing us how much she's evolved over the years. But yeah, you know, a Lana Del Rey album is special when it's blowing away even me, one of her consistently biggest detractors for quite a while. And look, honestly, at this point, even I am glad that I could really stand on this record and say, yeah, you know what? It's a fantastic work. It's a fantastic freaking work. Of course, I also could not forget to include the 2023 album from singer, songwriter, and producer Sampha Lahai. This was the highly anticipated follow-up to his first album, and it was very much well worth the wait, as the vocals on this record are beautiful, are angelic, are incredible. The tunes, the ballads, captivating, gorgeous. The melodies, stunning. The production, an interesting fusion between electronic and acoustic instrumentation. I love the contrast between how busy and intricate and intense the beats are, but simultaneously how gentle and somber the music and textures throughout the record are. I also love the conceptual narratives throughout the record, many of which tie around the story of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and it's just a very thoughtful, very wonderful, very gorgeous album all around, and certainly one of the best of not just 2023, but the 2020s in general. Also from 2023 was the excellent new album from ANOHNI and the Johnsons, My Back Was a Bridge for You to Cross. ANOHNI Hagarty is an artist whose long, expansive, multifaceted career is really difficult to encapsulate in, a quick touchdown on an album such as this. But let it be known, she has been at it for years and years and years, and over the course of her very impressive career up until this point, she has experimented with a lot of different sounds, has been artistically and socially a big advocate for the queer community at large, and that is as true now as it ever was on this latest project here, where she brings back the Johnsons moniker and band for a great set of songs that fuse together elements of rock music and soul with an amazing set of performances that translate so well all of these tracks that deal in the LGBTQ community being under fire, essentially, needing to rise above all of the obstacles in their path right now. It's a lot of protest music at a time where, frankly, it's very much needed. And while some dark times are most definitely explored on this record, there are glimmers of hope as well. And the title and cover obviously serve as a reminder of the long history of figures that had to work and fight hard to bring things even to the point where they are now. And even in the face of such great injustice today, that fight and that progress can still continue as long as the momentum is further pushed. I don't think this list would be complete without this next inclusion, and that would be Kaz the Thief Next to Jesus. This is the Brownsville rapper's final album, as unfortunately he passed away to the surprise of many shortly after its release. And even though obviously it is a massive tragedy, a massive loss to the hip-hop community, anybody who's really in tune with the underground, with the more artful lanes of the genre, it really does hurt in many ways to lose Ka, but he did leave us with an incredible, just mind-blowing final work here. Really an exploration of spirituality and organized religion itself, its pros, its cons, with a lot of stellar wordplay per usual, as that's pretty much what he was known for. Really killer instrumentals that brought in elements of gospel music and the like, which obviously played into the overall themes and concept of the record really well. We have his trademark, entrancing, locked in, chilling flow and voice too, all over this record. But yeah, it's another great body of work from a man who had many to speak of in his final days, that's for sure. Now, next, I would be absolutely foolish if I were not to mention Little Simz's Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. Maybe this sounds weird to say, because I know Little Simz, UK rapper, songwriter, fantastic artist here, isn't exactly new to the game or anything like that, but sometimes when I think about the dismal state of the music industry and the creativity that we see in the mainstream broadly, and just feel jaded and disillusioned, I think of Little Simz and am just reminded that actually, you know what? There's hope. There's hope out there, because this is a one-of-a-kind album from a one-of-a-kind artist who frankly does not get enough attention and shine for how great and fantastic she is. Not only are her verses and bars and performances on this record on point as hell, but the epic string-kissed Grandiose instrumentals all over this record from front to back are absolutely stunning and really enhance everything she has to say about kind of being in her own head, being an up-and-coming woman in hip-hop, being as ambitious as she is lyrically. There are some really cool musical side quests throughout this record as well, where she touches down on some genres outside of the usual UK rap scene that honestly are a really well executed surprise. But yeah, if I had to sum up this album in 2 words, I would say awe-inspiring. And I feel like when the dust is settled, Little Simz is really going to be standing tall on an incredible catalog that is going to be worth going back to again and again. Next, I would like to shout out one of the most unlikely but incredible crossovers of the last 5 years, and that would be the album Promises from Floating Points from Pharoah Sanders, as well as the London Symphony Orchestra, which, if you've never heard of this album, and maybe you haven't, it's not the most hype LP necessarily, you might be seeing those names and thinking, what? Because, yeah, you're talking about the London Symphony Orchestra, essentially backing up a pretty respected and legendary UK electronic music artist, as well as the late jazz great Pharoah Sanders. And all I can say still to this day about this album is, wow, because this record is such an incredible and unique genre-blending triumph. True to the mix of styles brought by its respective collaborators, you have elements of electronic music, you have elements of jazz, and all of that's being kind of like wrapped up in all of this super lush, gorgeous orchestration. And the whole record plays out in a series of continuous, similar but always subtly changing passages and movements that honestly test the boundaries of each respective musical style, kind of going into the amazing soup that is being created on this record. But yeah, really a significant one over here, and a creative benchmark for all involved, honestly. Let's also hit another massive record for me personally in 2021. That would be the Lingua Ignota record, Sinner Get Ready. Lingua Ignota is the former musical project and stage name of pianist, vocalist, and songwriter Miss Kristen Hayter. And before this album came out, she already had some very impressive lead-ups, like the record Caligula, which already showcased this project's very special knack for tying together Christian imagery and theology with noise and industrial music and classical music, while simultaneously exploring very heavy themes around spirituality and abuse. And all of those elements are dug into even further and in ways that are frankly even more raw and vulnerable and intense, which makes Sinner Get Ready not just a powerhouse of a record sonically, but also emotionally. The fear, anguish, pain, and seething anger expressed all across this record are frankly unparalleled. The vocal performances still to this day blow me away. It is really a dense, a difficult album, but still also a gratifying one, because if you listen to this thing, I promise it will be one of the most heart-stopping musical experiences you'll have in your life. Let's take it further back to 2020 on this next one, where we have Gorillaz with Song Machine. And at this point, I don't know if Gorillaz, the famed, fictitious, animated band, needs any further cultural explaining. I feel like everybody kind of gets the deal with Gorillaz for the most part. Everybody likes some Gorillaz jams. Lots of classics, lots of bangers, lots of great moments under the band's belt at this point. And there was kind of a minute there where creatively it felt like things were a little bit in limbo. The songs weren't quite hitting, the collaborations and crossovers weren't quite as impressive as maybe they were back in the day. However, I really feel like the band came back with a force, a creative force, and a lot of cartoony, amazing production, and frankly, stunning collaborations on this Song Machine record, which when it originally dropped, it was kind of insinuated this was going to be a part of a series of things. I mean, you know, I might chalk a lot of that up to pandemic craziness. There was a lot of craziness going on in the pandemic in terms of, you know, plans and ambitions people had that maybe didn't quite, you know, end up following through because, you know, but who knows, maybe we will get another Song Machine record down the road. I don't know. Look, all I can say about this album overall is that I feel like it is just an excellent example of Gorillaz returning to form, with Damon Albarn absolutely smashing it, not just with some of the best beats and instrumentals of the group's entire career, but some of the most epic and unlikely and surprising crossovers in the album's main track list, as well as on the deluxe cuts of the record too, be it JPEG Mafia or even Elton John. But yeah, it's great to have Gorillaz kind of come back on a record and remind us of what made the project so great in the first place. Which I would say is also the case for this next album that dropped in 2020 as well. That would be the Blue and Exile album, Miles. Now, if you are a West Coast hip-hop fan, an underground hip-hop fan, Blue and Exile, those are names that should grab your attention. Their first major collab together Below the Heavens is a pretty legendary record at this point. However, they came back with Miles, and this is a jaw-dropping album, and really an immense work that frankly blows the work ethic of a lot of hip-hop artists out of the water, because not only in typical Blue and Exile fashion is this a tasteful, thoughtful, well-written, charismatic, captivating jazz rap album, packed with stellar beats and performances from Exile and Blue respectively. But it's also a concept record on all of these themes around jazz and Miles Davis and a bunch of other things too in that web of musical and artistic connections. But maybe what continues to be the most mind-blowing thing about this record is that it does all that, it executes it all so well, and it goes the distance with these ideas and these musical flavors like a marathon runner, because the runtime of this record is 90 minutes. It's like, you know, a massive double LP experience. It's just so many damn tracks, so much damn material, and while super bloated albums are nothing surprising in the mainstream these days, this record brings a lot of material, a lot of density, but there's no filler in there. There's no crap. It's all amazing. But yeah, honestly, if on any level we are living in a just world like 20 years from now, this is going to go down as a legendary hip-hop album, and certainly one of the best of the 2020s. Earlier in this list, I mentioned the East Coast rap duo consisting of lyricist Billy Woods, Armand Hammer, and I also have to shout out a release that was done in a little bit more of a solo capacity, and that would be the album Maps, where he is backed up by the one and only producer, Kenny Siegel. Billy Woods is someone who, if you follow this channel regularly, I would hope you're aware of him by now, as well as aware of what exactly makes him so special. The grim and dour tone of a lot of his words and storytelling, his elusiveness, his flow and rap delivery that sometimes borders on spoken word, his grim and dour wordplay, his incredibly sharp wit. These are characteristics that were very much apparent on some of his earliest works, and over the years he's only fine-tuned these elements of his music with record after record after record. And I would say with this Kenny Siegel record, he has truly reached a peak of sorts, with some of his most mind-blowing and urgent bars to date. Plus, Kenny Siegel allows for just a very versatile palette of jazz rap and abstract hip-hop, and regardless of what's being thrown at him, Billy very much sounds at home and has a lot to say. But yeah, overall a great record and proof of just how great left field hip-hop has been over the past 5 years, which I would say is also the case for this next team up, and that is going to be JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, Scaring the Hoes. This 2023 album features two of the internet's most respected hip-hop figures. They each have their own cult followings of completely diehard fans, where there's a lot of crossover audience between the two, this audience similarity, as well as the fact that they have a mutual respect for each other's sound and art, brought them together for a full-length album collaboration that frankly is incredible. Like, it's just banger after banger after banger after banger, and sure, while it does seem like in terms of the production and song structure there's a lot more JPEG Mafia than there is Danny Brown going into this album much of the time, these two still have a ton of creative chemistry to speak of, especially as they really do truly fulfill the mission set by the title of this record, and that is just, you know, kind of fully giving into the idea of making hip-hop that is weird, is scaring the hoes. But yeah, killer album, mind-blowing at points, and I think it's really going to go down as one of the best collaborations of this decade. Switching gears, I would like to address the fantastic Godspeed You Black Emperor album, their no title record. Godspeed, the legendary Canadian post-rock and experimental rock outfit, historically being as socially and politically minded as they are, of course, it is no surprise on this album that they essentially decided to focus the title and the passion, the emotion behind the art on the horrors of the Palestinian genocide that has been happening over the course of 2024. And at the time of me filming filming this video. While a ceasefire has been agreed to, independence and justice long-term for the Palestinian people is still very much far, far away. I mean, in fact, I would say it is very much yet to be guaranteed. And again, Godspeed does an amazing job, not just through the presentation of this album, but the art within it, at drawing attention to this issue and saying so much while simultaneously not saying anything at all, as we do have a series of instrumental tracks on this record, which in typical Godspeed fashion undergo a series of lengthy, grand, rock, classical fusion buildups and crescendos. It's absolutely powerful, and while it does have some very heavy and despondent as well as grim moments, there are glimmers of hope at the very end. Truly one of their best releases to date, and a project that frankly highlights simultaneously the power of art, but how difficult it is to be in a place, in a space where you are absolutely powerless to stop such great horrors and injustices from happening to innocent people. Also a 2024 release, a pretty big one in fact, that is going to be Kendrick Lamar's GNX. Yes, that has made this list, of course. A record that in the immediate sense, even by me, has been characterized as a bit of a victory lap, kind of a post afterthought following the massive beef, multi-track back and forth that Kendrick had going with the pop rap superstar Canada's own Aubrey Drake Graham. And while, yeah, that assessment is very much true, I feel like this record has so much going for it beyond the context that it was originally born out of. And these aspects, I hope, are what kind of carries the fandom for it going forward into the future, because outside of anything beef related, what is so stellar about this record is all of its just crazy LA and West Coast inspired synthified rap bangers with some of Kendrick's catchiest choruses to date. We have amazing smooth jams with SZA on Luther, an amazing Tupac tribute, some of Kendrick's headiest and most conceptual cuts to date. We have the 6th installment of The Heart, where he really narratively goes back to the earliest days of his burgeoning rap career and describes essentially what it was like and how he kind of like helped put himself in a position to succeed, and those who he had around him that helped make it happen too. It's a record that simultaneously has a little bit of something for everybody on it, and also just does all of those things respectively very incredibly well, to the point where even though it is kind of disparate, it is a little all over the place, it still works as an overall record. Great flow on the track list too. But yeah, Kendrick really nails a refined balance on this project in terms of giving us straightforward, direct, hard-hitting cuts that are just endlessly vibey and replayable, and then you have a lot of songs that honestly hand over a lot of food for thought. But yeah, GNX, in my opinion, is truly one of his best, which is saying something considering how high the highest and most amazing peaks of his catalog have been so far. Next on this list, I would like to point some attention once again to the incredible Chelsea Wolfe album, She Reaches Out to, She Reaches Out to She, where one of the most consistently inconsistent figures and songwriters in the goth music scene switches it up once again on an album that sees her embracing elements of electronic and industrial music, Trip Hop 2, with a bunch of tracks that see her bringing, at the same time, just despondent, thick walls of metal-type heaviness, but now with a lot more atmosphere and beats and synthetics. Combine that with a bunch of beckoning, eerie, and gorgeous ballads sitting at the core of all of these sonic monsters, and you essentially have one of the best albums, not just of 2024, but the decade so far. It's dense, it's entrancing, it's captivating, and very much well worth your time. Next, we have one of the most surprising debuts of of the decade so far. That would be Jordy Griep's The New Sound. This record came pretty quickly after the announcement of his usual band at the time, Black Midi, the UK experimental rock outfit, being put on hiatus, essentially, you know, going kaput. Hate to see it, considering how great their material had been up until that point, but simultaneously, this album over here is amazing as well, and I couldn't really see it happening in any other context other than a solo one for Jordy, considering how over the top and singular the vision of this album is, how heavy it is on narrative, as a lot of the tracks seemingly deal in the personality of this man who is somewhat narcissistic, self-obsessed, not super lucky with the ladies, has a lot of struggles around his sexuality and his masculinity, and it works in layers too, because surrounding that there are these somewhat confusing dealings in fantasy and reality too. Then couple that with the fact that you have numerous tracks on here that are essentially giving us this really thrilling, exciting, and unique combination of not just jazz rock and progressive rock, but Brazilian music too. And yeah, you just have a wild ride of an album that honestly, every time I go back to it, I'm peeling back more layers. Moving on, shout out to a record that personally over the past 5 years I feel like is lesser known and very underappreciated. That would be Topical Dancer from Charlotte Adigéry and Bolis Poupou, who teamed up for this very smart, well-produced record that is pretty much what you see is what you get as far as the title is concerned, as you get a bunch of very quirky, electro, new wave inspired dance pop cuts that, yes, are very topical, are thematic, are socially conscious a lot of the time, a lot of satire and tongue-in-cheek humor going on within these tracks. In fact, some of the tracks on this thing run almost like the best possible version of what you could imagine a musical PSA would be like. Whether Charlotte and Bolis are addressing things like xenophobia and racism, or being at a place in your life where you are first coming to terms with your sexuality. But yeah, it's a very fun, thoughtful album that every single time I come back to it, I get a lot out of it. And I do personally think it is one of the best records of the decade so far. Following this, I want to shout out the Sylvana Estrada album Marchita, which simply put is just beautifully produced Mexican folk of the highest order. Just one captivating ballad after the next on this thing, gorgeous vocals, beautiful surrounding instrumentation when it is in the mix, like horns, that sort of thing. Stunning performances from front to back. It's really a record that showcases how powerful simplicity can be. It's actually shocking to me that this record isn't bigger than it is, because with material this quality, Sylvana is truly one of the most underappreciated singer-songwriters on the Latin circuit at the moment. Keeping it folk on this next shout out too, that's going to be Big Thief's Dragon New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You. Now, Big Thief is a group that has been doing really well on the indie circuit for quite a while. That and the solo material of their lead singer and songwriter, Adrian Lenker. And while I've enjoyed quite a bit of their material up until this point myself, I was really not foreseeing how incredible this new album submission from the band would be, because not only does it showcase some of their best songs to date, a super wide versatility of sounds from the indie underground, even some experimental rock tracks, I would say. The band dips their toes into some folk rock and country as well in this track list, but maybe the most interesting and gratifying thing about the entire record is how consistent it is quality-wise and how much material there is on this album. At 80 minutes and 20 tracks, this project is truly a powerhouse, one that is probably going to continue standing tall in the band's catalog as they continue to perform and record. And right now, as far as anything indie folk is concerned in the 2020s, this is really a benchmark album that is truly setting the standard, setting a high watermark, whatever you want to call it. Not to mention the killer vocals, the rustic instrumentation, how textured and and frankly fantastic the recording is for being so lo-fi a lot of the time. I could go on. This next one is also from 22, but switching gears into the hip-hop lane. That would be JID or JID's The Forever Story. This was the long-awaited follow-up to JID's 2018 DiCaprio 2 mixtape, with this being a big album release for J. Cole's Dreamville Records. There was a lot riding on this record, being as quality as it is, especially with JID having built up such a reputation up until this point for being really a rapper's rapper, somebody who really knows his way around a verse, can flow quite precisely and quickly, but still it doesn't necessarily fall into that cornball spectrum of rippity rap fast rappers, because he actually showcases quite a bit of wit and genuine heart in a lot of his writing. Like, he's an impressive performer, but he doesn't perform merely to impress you on a technical level. And The Forever Story, honestly, is everything that it should have been and more. Really the rap album of the year for 2022 as far as I'm concerned. And it's all thanks in part to an incredible combination of great production, a versatile track list musically and topically, JID giving us fire bars track after track after track, a handful of quality features too, and very thoughtful cuts all over this album that address the cycle of social ills plaguing our society, the Black community too, and almost seeing a futility or a continuum in the ongoing process of overcoming these obstacles and these struggles. Hence why the material on this amazing record lives up to the Forever Story title. This next band I addressed in part earlier, that is going to be Black Midi with their record Hellfire. Prior to breaking off into his own solo direction, singer-songwriter guitarist Jordy Greep obviously was a part of this amazing, short-lived, experimental and jazz rock outfit Black Midi. But in discussing how fantastic of a record this is, we also can't forget about the contributions of Cameron Picton as well as Morgan Simpson. Now, as far as this modern age of jazz and experimental rock are concerned, few albums are as wild a ride as Hellfire. Going back to it, this record is frickin' crazy. It's intense, it's high octane, it's eccentric, it's out of control. While obviously part of me enjoys the steady and conceptual hand guiding a majority of the material on the new sound that I mentioned earlier, Hellfire is just a thrilling, exciting release. It pulls from a wide variety of bands from the prog and avant rock scene, and somehow manages to legitimately push boundaries in a lot of wild and out there ways, whether it be in the storytelling and the vocal approach, or just in how fast and frankly weird the instrumentation is. It really is rare these days that I find a record that is genuinely freaky, but also well conceptualized, produced, and performed. And yeah, Hellfire most definitely has all of that. I feel like there would be a big void in this list if I did not mention the fantastic God Don't Make Mistakes from Conway the Machine, the Buffalo rapper who made his name as a part of the Griselda Records crew, came through on this one with his highly anticipated Shady Records drop. And yeah, this album most definitely did not disappoint, because not only do you get those quality callbacks to old school boom bap and just really grimy classic, just old school hardcore hip hop, but you have Conway lyrically and topically diving into some of the most personal and vulnerable songs he's ever written. There's truly some heart-wrenching stuff on this album that to this day stands tall over a lot of the stuff that's happening in hip hop broadly. Sure, there are a lot of albums out there that might be catchier or sell more or whatever, but the emotional impact of this thing, if you really listen to it, is heavy. But yeah, really a special hip-hop record over here that shows a one-of-a-kind artist at his peak in terms of having an ear for production, really laying it all out there on the line emotionally on a lot of these tracks, digging into his own psyche, his own heart, and also, just being at his best lyrically too, his best and most thoughtful. Gotta love those bone-chilling, giggly ad-libs too. Also from 2022, we're on a bit of a 2022 run right here as I'm kind of going through the rest of this list. Shout out to Sudan Archives for Natural Brown Prom Queen, the songwriter, singer, rapper, rapper, violinist comes through with a really special, multifaceted album on this one. This is a record that is fantastic, is entertaining, is dense, really gives you a lot of material, a lot to chew on, a lot of different musical flavors, a lot of topical food for thought as well. It's a difficult record to sum up simply because so much is going on. But, you know, one of the most impressive things about this album is that despite the fact that it involves so much in terms of genre influences and talent and musical study, the Sudan Archives like really nails the vast majority of what's on here. And again, it's just so much material, especially for like one artist for the most part to be drumming up. And also a very interesting and wild release for Stones Throw Records as well. One-of-a-kind album from a one-of-a-kind figure in underground music, who frankly I am looking forward to hearing more from through the rest of this decade. It would be an absolute shame to go through the rest of this time period with only one Sudan Archives album. In fact, that can't be, because this thing is just so damn good. Next on this list, kind of a sad moment, bit of a swan song album, though not completely. This band is really kind of moving into a different era on their next studio album. Of course, I'm talking about Black Country New Road, Ants from Up There. If you are at all an underground rock or indie rock fan or art rock fan, you've most likely heard of this album. It is downright legendary at this point. The amount of love and really obsessive fans that this record has drummed up in such a short period of time is justification alone for its inclusion in this list. This album is as popular as it is among, you know, the underground rock set for very good reasons. However, the group's, many would say, very essential lead vocalist departed from the band shortly after the release of this album, putting them in a position where they were really at a bit of a loss as to what to do and where to go next. However, the group is planning to move on, you know, kind of passing around different vocal duties to different members of the band. They released a live album recently, kind of, you know, road testing this approach, and a lot of that record was quite good. So it does seem that Black Country New Road will continue to put out quality music. So, I mean, I'm not exactly worried. Things are looking up for the band for sure, but, you know, with things having changed so wildly and radically post this album, I mean, it kind of ensures that, like, we're not going to get another record like this. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm still talking about albums. Okay, let's go. Home stretch. Boom, boom. Okay, next, shout out to English singer-songwriter Mr. Richard Dawson, who came through with a really unforeseen collaboration with the Finnish progressive and avant-rock outfit Circle. Henki is the name of their crossover, and while I was not very familiar with Circle's work going into this record, their and Dawson's respective styles marry very well and give us a very forward-thinking rock album with a lot of old-school prog vibes and a lot of cool narratives woven throughout the lyrics as well. It is epic, it is well-produced and performed, it is a record that has a lot of density to it too, a record you can really chew over, a truly unique album that is very much worth your time. I would say that is also the case for this next one, JPEG Mafia's LP. Peggy, who if you're familiar with this channel, you should already be well familiar with. I've addressed him prior in this video talking about his crossover collaboration with Danny Brown, Scaring the Hose. LP over here is really my favorite solo release of his so far. I think a high watermark in his discography. And with this record, between its shouty, aggressive performances, between its completely out there production, between its esoteric samples, and a wide array of left field influences, I think it really sets the standard for alt-rap so far in this decade, and quite possibly for the rest of the decade to come, which is why for me it had to make it on this list. Also helping to set the standard for singer-songwriter records this decade, in my opinion, that will be Laura Marling with the Song for Our Daughter album. An interesting record for Marling because she really does kind of like strip back a lot of her sound, instrumentally speaking, on this record in a series of tracks that are, you know, very homespun, very intimate, very low-key in terms of their presentation, but absolute just power bombs of emotion when you dig into the lyrics around not just heartache and separation, as well as, stuff like affairs, but also Marling beginning to enter into motherhood on this album as well. Addresses that a bit on some absolutely beautiful, breathtaking songs on this record too. Again, killer, simple but powerful instrumentation, very experienced, very passionate and deep, well-sung vocals throughout the record too, poetic songwriting. I really can't praise this album enough, and if you weren't already aware, she did kind of a follow-up record, Patterns and Repeat, that is pretty much a second helping of a lot of the great stuff that made this album so special. Now switching gears into the more jewelry record, True Opera, which is a very straightforward but also exciting album, and one more unforeseen crossover here, Mental Jewelry teaming up with poet, avant-gardist, a prolific singer and songwriter, Mother, and together they embark on an interesting music experience here that I feel like they really only could have conjured together. This record, stylistically, is really throwing it back to the old school noise rock and no wave scene in a series of tracks that have very rough and intense punky performances. It really is a rock experience like no other so far this decade, and just does such a great job of being in touch with some really old school underground vibes and aesthetics that frankly are due for a reassessment critically and a comeback too. Next, shout out goes to the experimental and electronic music duo Matmos, the record The Consuming Flame. Now Matmos, if you are not familiar, are a legendary long-time music duo that has done quite a bit of pioneering in the fields of electronic music, in art pop, in sample-based music, in honestly a lot of different shades of avant-garde. And their records are often known for their interesting sample-based source material or, very unique conceptual angles. That is, of course, also true for this record over here, where Matmos's source material on this thing is essentially collaborations, crossovers with other artists, both old and new. There are actually tons and tons and tons of collaborators being sampled in some form or fashion on this record, really too many to count, and it all amounts up into this just massive triple LP experience that leads to some of the most mind-bending experience of Matmos's entire career. And this is truly saying something. We are talking about a duo here that did an entire album where they sampled a washing machine's washing cycle, and it's actually an incredible LP. It's a great album, but The Consuming Flame is an even bigger, more ambitious release, and its various pieces across its runtime are just even crazier and more out there for it. This is truly one of the hardest albums to kind of break down in a blurb or a quick mention such as this. I would just say, listener beware. If you do give this album a try, really get ready to hunker down. I mean, sure, you could try the record in, chunks of each disc, but really get ready to hunker down and just like have your tastes and have your conceptions of electronic music, of production challenged, because this record will really broaden your tastes, I promise you that. I don't think this video would be complete without a mention of the Ichiko Aoba record Windswept Eden. Japanese folk artist and singer-songwriter Ichiko Aoba comes through with a record that honestly is equally gentle and stunning. It is just entrancing vocals and very simple, stripped-back beauty throughout. There is a refinement and a gentleness to this record that is difficult to put into words, frankly. Beauty, 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 beauty is just purely what it is the best way that I could sum it up, truly and honestly. Contrasting mood-wise, though, we also have the Black Dresses album, Peaceful as Hell, where the now defunct experimental duo really came through with a landmark album of tracks that, yes, dive into the harshness and ugliness of the world with very abrasive and explosive performances and homespun production. But there's simultaneously a lot of love and heart packed into these songs too, sometimes hope as well. Members Debbie McCallion and Ada Rook really show a lot of creative chemistry and sisterhood and collaborative spirit among the tracks on this record too. But yeah, if you're a listener that can really withstand the abrasiveness and the heat this record has to offer, I think you'll be able to see the humanity in the songs on this album too, especially with them somehow, despite the record being as in your face as it is, the tracks, the songwriting is just so sharp and so catchy. Sharp and catchy and full of heart are words that I would also use to apply to the many tracks off of the Porter Robinson album Nurture, a beautiful little album from Porter where he really leans into his singer-songwriter chops in the biggest way for the first time, and it gives us a lot of beautiful shoegazy, lush instrumentation, tunes, and melodies that are borrowed from J-pop and anime soundtracks and video game music too. He really pulls together a lot of gorgeous and nostalgic influences for a series of songs that speak a lot to his personal anxieties and anguish, and really see him coming into his own as an emotionally mature person. But yeah, just gorgeous production and thoughtful personal songwriting all around on this one. And tying things up for this video, I am going to lay down my sword for the Spelling album The Turning Wheel, a mystical, wondrous album of wonderful art pop anthems and songs that, frankly, I will go as far as to say this is the most immaculately produced record of the decade so far. The instrumentation is just so perfect and methodically assembled and beautiful, and it just adds to the theatrics and the drama of all the songs on this thing. Singer-songwriter Tia Cabral really came through with a record on this one that is witchy, is otherworldly, and dives into a lot of themes and lyrics around just feeling out of place in the world that we exist in. There are calls of sorts for revolution on this record. There are attempts at trying to get back in touch with the natural world. It's really a special, mystical album that I am absolutely positively dazzled by every single time I take a moment to give it a listen. It's one of the few records I've given a 10 out of 10. It was my album of the year when it dropped, so again, of course it was going to end up in this list in this video, and that is going to be it, everybody. Those are my 50 favorite albums of the decade so far. You're the best. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you got some good dope-ass recommendations out of this video. You better have, honestly. Transition, have you given any of these albums a listen? Would any of them make your favorite records list of the decade so far? Let me know some of your favorite albums of the 2020s up until this point. And yeah, I will catch you in the next video. Anthony Fantano, Records 2020. Forever.